Welcome, come in.
Rufus. An autobiography of quiet observations. I am the sort of observer who can't help noticing the quiet arithmetic of ordinary days. I have learned to keep a ledger of small oddities, as if the universe were a notebook with margins written in invisible ink. My life, before monotonic gold found me, was a sequence of little patterns that seemed trivial at first, but kept nudging me toward a larger map. I hadn't yet named. I kept notes not to prove anything to anyone, but to keep my own thoughts from wandering off into the shadowed margins of chance. The town was a simple thing. A town that wore weather like a coat and never quite allayed its own mysteries. My job was modest, my income modest, my ambitions mostly private rituals performed in the hush between dishes and deadlines. I lived in a small, ragged cabin on the outskirts, a place that had learned to survive winters by listening to the wind, and to winter's wind by listening back. It wasn't the kind of place that birthed a genius, at least not in the sense of a lit-up storefront or a talk show invitation. It was a place where you could hear your own thoughts echoing, sometimes back to you with a grin of mischief, sometimes with a tremor of fear. I learned early that life hums in 2 or 3 clocks at once, even when you pretend you're just sitting in a chair and reading a book. The city's buses, the barometer of weather, the rhythm of your own breath. All of these are not separate but braided, glinting when the light hits them just right. I kept watching the way people moved through rooms, the way a cashier's voice steadies a room, the way a child's question unsettles a plan, the way a neighbor's cough becomes a metronome for a conversation that would never happen again, but that might still be felt as a tremor of meaning. People call me many things, and most of them were true enough in the moment. A quiet thinker, a stubborn skeptic, a daydreamer with ink-stained pockets. But I didn't know then that the life I was living was a kind of long rehearsal for a thing I hadn't yet learned to name. I collected smells and numbers the way others collect stamps. I paid attention to coincidences, not the sort that would sponsor a lottery ticket, but the kind that sits behind the eye and whispers. If you look long enough, there will be a seam in reality you can slip through. In those days, I traveled with a notebook that never left my jacket, the way a friend never leaves your side even when you forget its name. I drew diagrams in the margins of grocery receipts and on the back of envelopes and in the dust that settled on my desk when the window stayed open too long. The notebook held a stubborn belief that the world is not only what you can point to with a finger, but a field of possible connections you can feel if you listen with a certain kind of attention. It was not scientific yet, not exactly mathematical, but it carried something like the first tremor of the map I would later learn to trust. Events unfolded with the patient humor of a cat who plays with a toy for weeks before batting it away and returning to it at dawn as if nothing had happened. A calendar page, a stray remark, a repeatable coincidence that made you pause when you were sure you hadn't paused at all. A streetlight that flickered in time with a thought you hadn't said aloud yet. These were not proof, not even hypotheses, but a sense that the ordinary world was porous, that there were little doors between rooms that some days you could push open with nothing more than a steady gaze. I didn't know where those doors would lead, only that I kept walking toward them, as if walking into a story I was meant to complete, though I didn't yet know the plot or the villain or the clockwork that would bind them all. I could tell you that I believed in patience, in slow, careful inquiry, in respecting the complexity of a mind and a life that cannot be hurried without paying a price. And I could tell you that I learned, in the quiet hours, to distinguish between a genuine pattern and a phantom it might seem prudent to chase, between a truth you could test with your own lips and a comfort you could only borrow from others' confidence. If there is a hinge in this early life, it is not a dramatic moment, but a cadence, a memory of a night when the wind sounded almost like mathematics, when the room's shadows mapped themselves into two streams that seemed to have a kinship I couldn't name. I woke and wrote a line. The world is a loose lattice of moments, and each moment trembles with the possibility of a larger order. I did not call it a theory, not yet. I called it a feeling, a sense that there were rules at work that behaved as if they preferred to reveal themselves only when you stopped demanding the proof and began listening for the language in which proof chooses to speak. A neighbor's dog once barked in startling synchrony with a timetable I hadn't created. A clock.
Within the clock, an unlooked for signal that perhaps. Within the clock, an unlooked for signal that perhaps I was already circling something that did not want to be named. A barista's handwriting formed arcs on a cup that echoed the curves I drew on the whiteboard in private, an accidental graffiti of a mind preparing to announce its own hypothesis. To anyone patient enough to stand still and look absurd. Yes, some of it, but it felt like a preface written before the author knows the first sentence of a story that will consume the next decade. During this time I learned, almost by accident, the discipline of noticing without presuming. I learned that a tremor in an eye, a tremor in a breeze, an almost invisible shift in a schedule could become the skeleton key. You needed to open a door you hadn't known existed, and I learned that to carry this discipline forward, you must protect the creature you are, the stubborn, flawed, likable, sometimes infuriating creature who will love and argue and forget and forgive, and, if you're lucky, not forget to keep asking the right questions, even when the world tells you to stop asking because the questions are inconvenient or dangerous. In the end, those early observations were not merely journal entries. They were a way of breathing, a way of staying together with the life I lived before a spark of genius leaped from the floorboards and alighted on the ceiling, turning the ordinary into something uncomfortably bright. They were the preface to a book. I didn't quite know I was writing. A narrative in which the margin notes would become the body of the argument, and the argument would become a new sort of life. If you opened that notebook now, you would see the handwriting of a life that refused to pretend it didn't see order in the chaos, even as it learned to live inside that chaos with care. The autobiographical thread I am weaving here is not a boast but a map. It is the sketch before the portrait, the quiet room before the door opens to a corridor you didn't know you would walk. I offer, therefore, these lines as a way of inviting you in, not to admire a miracle, but to witness a turning, an awakening that did not arrive with a bolt of lightning, but with the patient, stubborn glow of something that had been there all along, waiting for the exact moment when a man with a notebook and a fever for pattern would step into the light and say, "This is how the world speaks if you learn its language." Chapter turns quietly forward into the spark. And yet the moment of spark is not a single flash. It is a chorus of small shocks that begins to align with the tempo you have learned to listen for. In the margins, I did not yet know monatomic gold, nor did I bear the sudden title of genius that would arrive with a gust of rumor and a handful of headlines. I only knew what it felt like to see a line in the air where there had previously been only fog, to feel the nervous tremor of a question that could not be silenced, to sense that the ordinary life I was living hid a door I hadn't noticed, behind which lay a deeper kind of order. The preface ends where the hinge breaks and the door begins to swing, into the room where the first small, ridiculous coincidences become the weather of a new mind, and where the old life's quiet observations become the scaffolding for discovery that will demand its own language. If you've followed so far, you have met the man who learned to listen to two clocks at once, who learned to hear a wind that spoke in equations, who learned that the life you live can be a translation device for truths that are too stubborn to be spoken plainly. And if you're patient, you'll come to understand not only what happens after this, after monatomic gold, after the sudden ascent to genius, but also what came before that long, careful, almost invisible build of noticing, of question-asking, of living inside a pattern, until the pattern becomes a reason to live differently. The door remains open, if you wish to go through it with me, to the next room where the real story begins. The cover-up, the shadows, the questions about what a life is worth if telling the truth would bring harm, and what a life can endure if keeping faith with certain people means risking one's own standing, one's own flesh, yes, one's own butt. Welcome. Again. Come in. Second half, after the spark. The city kept its weather, but its weather began to feel differently mine. The moment monatomic gold found me did not arrive as a single bright event so much as a flood of small, bright, ridiculous signs that pointed toward a truth I had not wanted to admit I was pursuing. In those first days after the drink, after the bottle, after the instant shift from modest living to a peculiar kind of illumination, I understood that genius, real genius, is not simply an awakening but a vow to bear the consequence of what you discover, even when the consequence is the end of a life you once thought you could live.
was not just a punchline. It was a stubborn symbol of self-preservation in a world eager to strip away the messy, imperfect, utterly human parts of a life for the sake of a tidy plot. It is a grotesque and comic thing to say aloud, but the body holds its own kind of memory, and I refuse to let the world's fear eat away at mine. If the evil in the world would feed upon me, I would starve that evil with parts of myself that I would not surrender. The stubborn dignity of a life lived with the smallest possible lie, the stubborn integrity of a person who refuses to let a single sentence become a weapon, the stubborn willingness to tell the truth even when the cost is the reputation you once believed to be your shield. So I spoke. I spoke to the notebook, to the sister, to the girlfriend who would not yield the path, to the self I had become, and to the self I could still become if I did not lose sight of the human beings who stood inside the story with me. I wrote lines that sounded like a manifesto and felt like a confession. Tay is a bridge, not a ladder. Coherence as a tool, not a virtue. Truth as a living thing, not a completed rescue. I wrote the truth I could bear to tell, and I left out the truth that would have crushed the people I loved if I had spoken it aloud to the world. In public imagination, the CPF and its tensities grew into a legend of genius and ruin, a parable about curiosity's price and the danger of wielding a language that can bend minds without bending hearts. Some days it felt like a lighthouse bright enough to guide others through the fog, and other days it felt like a siren, luring the curious toward a shore where the sea could swallow them if they believed the glow was safe. But in my own quiet hours, the question stayed clear as a bell. How do we distinguish between what is known, what is believed, and what is merely convenient? That question, costly, stubborn, necessary, remains the compass by which I navigate the work, and it is a question I suspect I will never fully answer, not in public, not in private, not in the language of math alone. And so I keep the room as it is, the monitor's pale glow, the whiteboards where sinuous lines map a private coastline, the notebook with its stubborn lines, the sister's diagrams, the girlfriend's occasional cautious trust, the very air that seems pregnant with a rumor that could topple a life or save a life depending on how truth is told. I keep the room, and I keep telling the truth. I can bear to tell, because the universe is in a secret universe, the one that can only be expressed through the new language of math, keeps offering its invitations in the form of coincidences both absurd and undeniable. If you listen long enough, perhaps you will hear not just a theory, but a life trying to be honest about what it has discovered, even if honesty comes with a price you never wish to pay. And so, we come back to this room, to the hum of the monitor, to the three tensities and the gamma rhythm that hold a fragile human world in a shared tempo. Welcome to the space where mathematics becomes a language for living, where the cover-up is a choice, where the threats are real, where the butt is a symbol of stubborn resilience, and where a life, if you listen closely, can still tell the truth about what is real when the world wants you to pretend it is a myth.